Should we start? Perfect. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. I know there is a lot of competition between different sessions. My name is Alena Kudzko. I'm Executive Director of GLOBSEC US Foundation, and I'm going to be moderator of the session today. We're going to be talking about the importance of cyber resilience, cyber deterrence, and societal resilience in the digital age. The title of our session is rather mysterious. It's called Better Late Than Never. I have to say that never late might be even better, but probably if we're talking about cybersecurity, that might not be entirely realistic. Being late in cybersecurity bears a huge cost, which might include life. But never being late in cybersecurity is not be achievable either. There's always going to be somebody who is trying to break in and to breach our defenses. Some of them will break in, and we'll have to do something about it. So it's not just about making sure that the ones we don't like don't get in, but also to make sure that when they do get in, we can detect the attack in time, we can contain the damage, and adapt quickly enough to make it possible. We're going to be talking both about bad news and how bad the situation is right now, but also about good news, about the progress we're making and what more progress we can do in the future. So we'll explore what works, what's evolving, and importantly, how Europe and all of us can stay resilient and increase the resilience in the face of accelerating threats. So luckily for that, we have a fantastic panel with us, and I will start on my right. We have with us Sir David Lidington, who is currently chair at the Royal United Services Institute in the United Kingdom. We have Azar Koulibaly, who is General Manager and Associate General Counsel, Corporate, External and Legal Affairs, Europe North, Microsoft. We have also Boštjan Košak, who is President of the Management Board, Telekom, Slovenia. And we also have with us the person who traveled the longest is Sadamasa, Lieutenant General, Japan Air Self-Defense Force, currently retired and currently Senior Fellow at Sasakawa Peace Foundation. Let me begin, though, with something very tangible. Just last week, FBI, JCHQ, and several partners, Europeans, Australians, Japanese, issued a joint advisory note on Seoul Typhoon. For those of you who don't follow that closely, Seoul Typhoon was a breach of telecommunication networks in the United States. And it was actually uncovered by Microsoft. But it turns out that Seoul Typhoon penetrated more than just networks in the United States. More than 80 countries were affected around the globe. Probably we still don't know the depth of the breach, but it's definitely the case that keeps resonating. So, Boštjan, I'm going to go to you first. You are represented Telekom Slovenia, which is the largest mobile and fixed network operator in Slovenia. But you're also a good case study for us. Telecommunication networks is a prime target these days. Either you're targeted for ransom or some intelligence services might be very interested to get in. Can you lead us through your thinking right now? How are you thinking about cyber defenses? Maybe what measures you've been taking recently? And if you're free to confess, where you see the vulnerabilities still?
First of all, we don't see ourselves as interesting at all for any attacks.
Nice try.
But yeah, also related to the Seoul Typhoon, it's very, we have different sorts of attacks, but usually they have some common denominator or some common objective, which is either ransom, either damage, either collecting informations. And within all of this, we have two groups, actually. One is what we see, what we experience, like the incident you mentioned in the telecommunication network that happened recently, and things we don't see. And especially on data collection, there are many things we don't see. Certain incidents, we see what maybe attackers want us to see, and we don't see things that we don't see. So first, what is very important is that you're consistent in implementing all the protective measures, which usually means also that you need skilled personnel. At the end of the day, still, regardless of all the automated systems and all the emphasis on artificial intelligence, people are still in this process very important. On the other hand, process is very important. You have to have established processes. I think that this is something that we very much also adopted from US and European Union, make out of the very specific processes, then very administrative processes, but at the end of the day, processes are important, and I think is part of this resilience that have to be established. Now, our experience, we had a large flood several years ago in some part of Slovenia. Since we are a national incumbent operator, we are present all over, which means that people in this specific region were cut off from telecommunication, but actually cut off from everything, electricity, everything. It was not so much problem of telecommunications because our systems worked, but electricity actually didn't work. What we have learned is actually that we had implemented very strict procedures in such cases, which meant that when this started, when we realized there's going to be a power outage, we immediately started preparing and also executed plans for such incidents, which mainly meant that we brought different facilities which were like generators, electricity generators, and we established network within hours. Why is this important? Because in all crisis situations, communication is one of the most important things. You need to communicate. Maybe that doesn't mean that you have your Netflix working, but it means certainly that you can call people, and especially it means that you can call emergency services. So I would say that the prime thing that we must, this foundation of resilience in this regards is having very focus on emergency services and communication of people. First, it's important because of the response. Second, it's important because it gives people certain comfort that they are not alone, that something is happening, that help is coming, and so on. So, in short, this would be our recent experience in this regards. Otherwise, we are not interesting for thanks.
Most important takeaway. Thank you so much, Boštjan. Azar, I'm going to move to you. Boštjan highlighted several things. You actually have to think creatively how you can be attacked. There's definitely linkages between physical and cyber elements. But I want to go back to you because, of course, companies like Telekom Slovenia are not alone. There are other companies, there are governments who are also equally participating in the defense and resilience of critical infrastructure. From your experience at Microsoft, can you give us a little bit of a preview? What has changed maybe over the past year? Most recently, what are some of the effective measures you started implementing or recommending? And again, where you still think we're falling short?
Yeah, no, more than happy to. And I do think you're interesting in all the right ways and not in the ways that should, lead anyone to want to attack you. So, but no, I would say, well, first of all, I think the biggest change really, obviously the geopolitical strife, but that's been around for quite some time. We may not hear about it as much, but cybercrime, and especially from nation-state actors, has been a consistent threat for very many years. What I think the biggest change, though, is the impact that AI is having, right? Now, AI, of course, not only is making cybercrime cheaper to scale, right? It's more of an operating model, but also more effective in many ways. But I think one thing we don't talk enough about is the fact that AI is not only a force multiplier for the offensive threat actors, but also can be a force multiplier for the defensive actors, right? It can be and should be, and in fact must be, a method of defense as well. And I think that's one thing that Microsoft is trying very hard to push. We say, I think it's the 3 C's. It's the things we will need in this new era is capacity, communication, which you just mentioned, and then finally consequences. And I think if you think of capacity, that's probably where, for the most part, we will see industry taking the biggest step, which is, I think, making sure that we are, providing the AI and other technological means that are necessary to have truly hardened interfaces and systems. But also, I think, working with others in industry to make sure that that is true, not just in some sectors, but in all sectors. Because I think sometimes we say critical infrastructure, people might think banks, they may think, nuclear power plants and such. But I was having a great conversation this morning about, some attacks we've seen on municipal water boards, right? And you think about what could happen to the water systems in a city. It could be a devastating and catastrophic situation that a cyber criminal could actually take advantage of. And that may be a very small organization that has maybe one person working in IT. So when I say that we need to think about capacity building, it is really across critical infrastructure and beyond. When that comes to it. Then there's communication. And I think that's a space where it's not just industry, it's not just those in critical industry, it's also the states and working together with governments and across industry and thinking more broadly in a multilateral manner. And as you mentioned, there's things happening or maybe being identified in the US that then scale out to the world. And so thinking through, and I'm so happy to see that we actually have such a diverse and multicultural panel here, because this is what we need, right? Is communication across borders, across segments. It's not just industry, it's not just nation states, and it's not governments acting in their own capacity. It's governments thinking in multilateral pathways. And then finally, there's consequences. And what we really need to make sure, and I do think this falls, upon the states, but also states acting in multilateral manners, is there needs to be a consequence for this type of crime. There needs to be clear red lines as to what is and is not acceptable. There need to be clear lines as to what actions will be taken against those who commit these crimes, and it needs to be attributed to those who do it. And we need to make sure that we are working as organizational structures, whether that's, again, governments acting alone or governments acting in multinational manners, to identify and, if possible, prosecute those who commit these crimes, and that will then lead to more deterrence and make sure that we don't see it continue. So that's where we are, and I think finally, a plug, of course, to the work we're doing at Microsoft with our European security program is to actually help governments, and it's not just, we say European, it's not just the EU member states, also the accession states, and really the broader EFTA region, including some just outside the EFTA, so it's quite broad, is to actually work with governments on that capacity piece and on that communication piece. And of course, we separately work every single day when it comes to threat sharing and intel sharing with many, many of our industry partners in the critical infrastructure space and beyond, because we are so committed to making this a reality. But it will take partnership across all the different sectors to make sure that we get those 3 C's landed.
There's a lot that you mentioned, and let's try to unpack it piece by piece. I'll start in the order of mentioning, and one of the important things that came up, no, it's actually great, and both of you have been talking about artificial intelligence and how much difference it makes. Sir David, I'm going to go to you, and we started the conversation earlier, and as I mentioned, of course, there are many ways how AI is capacity multiplier and force multiplier on the attacker side. Actually, I saw that Anthropic in their latest release said that they have instances when their AI agents already used not only just to get advice, but as an autonomous agent to execute cyber attacks. So there's probably more of that coming. In your experience, or from your thinking, how do you think we can use AI more efficiently on the defender side? What would it take? What may be tools that are becoming available? And what is important to make sure that we democratize the AI capabilities also on the defensive side?
I think in part the answer to your last question goes back to the partnership point between governments, both collectively and singly, and the private sector. And let me say a bit more about it. Let me go straight to the AI point that you made. Give you an example, a real-world example, which is that RUSI, which I currently chair, as well, does a lot of work with private sector companies. We're doing some with Microsoft at the moment on cyber matters, but we've also done some work with the Bank of England and the banking sector, and the financial services sector, for very good business reasons, is usually ahead of governments in terms of their own cybersecurity thinking. Actually, the UK government cybersecurity standard was originally based on what the City of London, the financial services sector, had already done itself to try to ensure the highest standards of social security to protect their business interests. And I remember a meeting about a year ago that Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England, hosted, where he was able to get the clearing banks and the telecoms companies and the internet companies and the regulators all together and talked about AI informally. And it was very clear that all the banks were clear that within a certain time frame, all alphanumeric codes are going to be obsolete because AI and quantum allied will enable a criminal or a hostile state to decode what's going on. And if you look at the speed in which deep fakes are developing, then voice recognition is going to be useless as a protective device. And the bank said, we don't know if this could be 6 months' time, it could be 6 years' time, it could be 16 years' time, we don't know, it'll happen one day. But they're also very clear that they can use AI to do 2 things. One is to work out very quickly the identity of the malware. Where does it come from? What is it a development of in terms of previously known viruses and Trojans? And secondly, AI with quantum will help you at speed to track down who is responsible for this, which will then help you with protective barriers and also with decisions about attribution if you want to make those. So it is something we need to use, but it's got to be, to be effective in partnership. One of the things the British government did when I was in government was to set up the National Cyber Security Centre in the UK, which for a time I had responsibility for. And that was deliberately done in order to share, in a sanitised way, the knowledge and expertise of our intelligence agencies with a not just a public, but a private sector audience. So this is a public-facing arm of GCHQ, our communications intercept intelligence agency, which anybody can look at their website. Anybody can read their reports. And you can report a breach and they will take action, block a scan site, for example. So this is a practical way, which I hope some other countries are now following, to try to improve things further. But the partnership is absolutely vital because so many key systems and services now depend upon either private sector suppliers or contractors to a government to deliver those services. And it's not just the main contractor we've got to look out for. It's a really difficult issue about supply chains, because whether it's Russia or China or a criminal outfit, they're looking for the weak link the whole time. And if they think it's not the big companies sorted this, but actually let's find out where their suppliers are, and they find a specialist small company somewhere, well, they've got a weak barrier. We get in there and then find a way into the system of the real target that we're after. So we have to have that partnership and make that work.
I'll bring in both Boštjan and Azar in a little bit on the public-private element, but I want to first go to our partners from Japan. And there were a lot of things that were mentioned that really bring in our partners in the Pacific very closely. I noticed also that in Japan, there's quite a lot of developments on the cyber front as well. There is a new cybersecurity law that's already came into force. It's called Active Cyber Defense, which is probably the title that would encourage quite a lot of people in the West. Can you lead us a little bit through what it entails, what the active component actually means, but also for us, if we can learn some lessons from the Japan experience that we can adapt here in Europe?
Okay, thank you very much. AI is everywhere. No matter what you call it, in the military operation, without AI, nothing can be operated. So including the cyberspace, AI is going to play a significant role. And the Japanese defense budget request next year actually include the $1.7 billion to enhance cyber capability. And one of the pillars is to AI to assist commander's decision. So in the cyber domain, processing too much data cannot be done by human being. So naturally, a cyber domain is artificial domain. So AI is going to play a significant role. Going back to the Japanese cyber security, cyber defense strategy, Japan decided the national security strategy in 2022 December. And national defense strategy, also defense build-up plan, we call it 3 security documents. And in that defense strategy, active cyber defense is considered. And this is going to be a very important capability for the self-defense force to possess. And it takes 2 years to legislate this active cyber defense law. And we had legislation in last May. So it takes more than 2 years, but this is a significant step forward. Active cyber defense cannot be done by the private sector. Government, self-defense force, military, intelligence, or a law enforcement entity can be done. So naturally, active cyber defense require the collaboration with the private sector, with government entity. So Japan has just started this active cyber defense operations, No lessons learned yet, so I have no lessons to provide you, but better late than never, right? So I would like to speak about a little bit challenges we have found to implement this active cyber defense. One is demarcation of work. We have already touched upon it, and maybe next we will discuss about it. The second one is a secure environment to share the data. Japanese late defense Prime Minister Abe proposed the data free flow with trust in 2019. This is very important to share the framework to share the data among the democratic countries. So Japan established the National Cybersecurity Office to pursue free, fair, and secure environment so that we can share the data with like-minded countries. And third, we need three classes of the people who are familiar with the cybersecurity. The first one is a very, very special skilled persons to do the threat hunting mission. What it means is to go to the network, either private sector or governmental sector, to identify the contamination. Your adversary tries to plant the malware before they initiate the operation. So this threat hunting tries to identify without letting them know, because if they know, they will try another method. So this specialist must be secured by the government, and also many staffs are working related to the cyber operations. So we have to train these cyber-related persons. And finally, we have to educate the public to raise the cyber literacy. And finally, a joint operation with ally, United States, and also international cooperation will be necessary. For example, we have a potential hotspot nearby Japan, Taiwan, and Korea. If you look at these potentially explosive crisis, we have to prepare ourselves in both kinetic and non-kinetic arena. North Korea exploit the cyber domains to earn Bitcoin money and then spend those monies to develop the ballistic missile and provide those munitions to Russia. So from Japanese perspective, Russian threat is similar to the Japanese future threat through North Korea or maybe China. So collaboration, sharing data, all of these things are very important. Without any cooperation, allies, like European countries, Japan will not be able to achieve this goal.
Thanks so much. There are definitely a lot of similarities, parallels in the threat perception, but also similar challenges in terms of division of labor, even within democratic countries, between agencies, not even mentioned in public and private sector. Boštjan, I'm going to go back to you. First, quick questions. Are you using AI for defensive purposes?
It's said that AI is, we call AI something that we don't recognize as something in common use. So once something becomes common use, regardless of the fact that it uses AI, we don't call it AI anymore. So it's a very blurred definition, what is AI and what is not. Now we can talk about large language models and other sorts of AI, but AI is present from your car to, I don't know, defense systems, always AI. Now there are really lots of things which use some sort of artificial intelligence in order to achieve certain goals. So my very broad answer would be yes, of course we do. In certain ways we are using it, but we are using different technologies. Now we are also using quantum computing, for example, for protection of our communications. So regardless of the fact that we don't understand quantum world sufficiently, and there are many things we don't understand is beyond our perception, but we can use it, for example, to understand if somebody is interfering with communication. So what we are doing is that within certain, I don't know, 50, 60 kilometers range communication that we have, we can see using quantum computing if somebody is interfering or trying to gather information on these specific lines, which is important. So one thing is important is that you implement technologies which are forward-looking, which you can test, which you can, at the end of the day, they are not so expensive, but you gather knowledge. And our experience actually with cybersecurity is that we also own operator in Kosovo. Kosovo is a very specific country in several ways, in a very specific region, and it was always somehow attractive for different sorts of cyber attacks. And we started developing our capabilities actually protecting Kosovo, especially against denial of service attacks and similar sorts of attacks. And out of that, already several years ago, we developed our own facilities, and then you have knowledge, then you have technologies, then you know how to choose technologies, and then you have certain expertise in this field, which at the end brings you the understanding that you're never safe, that you always have to work on being as safe as possible, but you're never safe. There are always things that you don't know and threats that you cannot actually measure or manage, but you have to be prepared for such events. So
you're a very good case of a company in Europe that's using advanced technologies and integrating it very fast. I wish more companies were like you.
But I think they do. I think they do. Maybe it's not so much explain about it. There are many things in labs still. At the end of the day, also security-wise, you don't talk what you do on security too much. I mean, quantum I can explain because there is no threat out of it. But in general, objective is that we have certain knowledge in this regards and regarding our relations to government bodies and also other institutions. For us, it is important that there is legislation, that there are rules, that we are part of process when these rules are established and these processes are formed. On the other hand, of course, we have a lot of expertise which exceed governmental bodies, especially in technical fields. And technical field, engineering field expertise is very hard to have in governmental bodies or institutions out of different reasons, because this is scarce resource and there are other elements which are making less attractive. So we have to work together, we have to have our roles in this working together, and I think that in general European Union is on good path, but fear is mainly that we will become too administrative, that we will try to do things we cannot do, like having complete control over AI and understanding AI. I'm not sure. The system itself is such that you don't understand AI. And AI is something that we will actually never understand. And yes, it is a fear if you have a black box in your kitchen already, not to mention the defense system. But likely we'll have to adopt that and find measures how to manage this. That's our perspective.
Azar, throwing this theme back at you, of course, like you have a long track record of working with governments across the world, actually. The general mentioned, I think, one important phrase that a private sector cannot do active cyber defense. At the same time, you're actually on the front lines, you're the ones who are detecting threats, you have to do something about them. Like, how do you actually see in the current situation the division of labor?
Yeah, and I would say, first of all, I agree that we can't do it alone, if that makes any sense. I think it does need to be, and again, to the panelists to the right here, it has to be a partnership, right? Because ultimately we do need the public and the private sector. And I also don't want to forget in the civil society space as well, right? We need our academic institutions, many of which are in fact building towards that capacity. So getting into that concept of division of labor, it's not just the governments, it's not just the industry, it's also academics and NGOs, which in many cases are actually at the front line with some of the technology that we're implementing. So we can't do it alone. I think ultimately, in most cases, some of the technological advancement may come from industry. I mean, you were just mentioning, in fact, how sometimes you are using technology to defend that is not available sometimes to governments. And in other cases, it may be that the government is more advanced. But having that open conversation and making sure that anything we are doing on the defensive side that is actually going to be helpful to, democratic nation states to defend themselves, that we are sharing that information and providing that technology in a way that can be used and utilized quickly. I think it's also really important to note that the issue that I think many of our attackers are experimenting on a daily basis in a way that is much, much more forward-thinking and calculated in some ways to continue to find wherever they can that advantage. And so we can't, I think when it comes to division of labor, we can't stop thinking through that, sometimes it may be scary, as you said, to use some of this more advanced technology, but if we don't, we actually will fall behind. It is ultimately a competition at all times with these threat actors who want to harm our institutions and our countries. And so we have to be thinking that way. And I think that is one place where civil society, our NGOs, and our academic institutions together with industry perhaps can be at the forefront and the vanguard of some of that experimentation in ways that maybe the government wouldn't be as comfortable. So I think there's opportunities there as well. And then finally, I think you mentioned it as well, and I just don't want to let that fall by the wayside, how important it is for governments to truly set the standards when it comes to consequences, when it comes to laws, and when it comes to actual outcomes that will happen when these attacks are occurring. That is not something for a company to do. That is not something we should be doing. We are not nations. We should not be setting criminal laws. We should not be pursuing criminals in that manner. We can support, but we ultimately will always rely on the rule of law and democratic nations to really set that. And so I think that's a space where it can be a better partnership, and I think it's even better when similarly minded nation states come together in multilateral organizations and other fora to set those types of consequences and outcomes together so that we can have even more predictability that when cybercrime occurs, there will be a very swift and certain action taken.
Sir David, we're going into this area, and there was one important element that the General mentioned, and this question of trust with the information sharing between different agencies within even the same government, but also between different private sectors for various reasons. How do you go about that? Do you think the situation is improving? What else can be done?
I think that the lead has to rest with governments here, and I think that your starting point, let's deal with sort of private sector first. The reality is that the technology and therefore the threat is going to develop faster than the law and regulation making processes of democratic countries. The time it takes to get a new law through Parliament, even a regulation drafted and consulted on and approved, you're going to be way behind the curve. So my preference is governments and national governments and in the European Union, the Commission should rely much more on a principle which says this is the standard that we expect to be met, and this is your responsibility to deliver on this in whichever way you judge is best, but not try to micromanage regulation because we will never keep up. But secondly, I think that governments need to be much more active in terms of mainstreaming both the importance of cyber defense, but also of cyber resilience, because some attacks will get through, throughout their societies. The vulnerabilities sometimes lie in mistakes made by very junior staff in a private or public sector organization. So the quality of training and the lessons about responsibility of the senior people are really important here. And I think then that at international level, we need to develop a network of agencies and governments that trust one another. I think that the work that's being done in NATO on this is good. I think that the EU toolbox is, it's worth having, but I think it's inadequate at the moment, and particularly when you look at some of the analyses of how the toolbox has worked in practice, the easy steps sort of are the ones that where you see a lot of evidence, but actually even attribution is not always relied on, and when you get to retaliatory actions, it's very rare. I find it quite interesting that even something like the transponders on Ursula von der Leyen's plane being switched off just a couple of days ago has not produced, as far as I know, a formal EU statement. No emergency foreign affairs council on this, been a statement from the president herself. And that tells me that that's not enough. So I think EU and NATO need to work more closely together. I think that EU, NATO, and national governments, because national security is ultimately a national government responsibility, even under the EU treaties, have to work more effectively together. We have a European basis through both the EU and NATO alliance to work effectively together, but then that should be linked to Five Eyes. We need to link that then into Japan, to Korea, and to other countries where there is sufficient trust, where we can do the serious discussions amongst political and military decision takers about our preparedness and critically about our responses to different threats. How do we deter people? How do we tell Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, in a way they will believe that there will be retaliation of a sort they will regret if they do X or Y? Because at the moment there's an acceptance that you could have severe damage to life and property and ways of living our lives through a cyber attack, but that does not trigger Article 5 automatically. Therefore, it does not have the Article 5 deterrent behind it. And I think we do need to find ways in which to clarify, crystallize our thinking on this, and to communicate where the red lines are to our adversaries.
We'll get back to the issue of red lines and deterrence in a second, but Boštjan, very briefly want to go back to you. One common thread between you and Sir David is that you are both not entirely thrilled with the EU efforts on cyber resilience right now. Cyber Toolbox was mentioned, NAS2 is coming into force. Your quick thoughts on that? Is that helping you? Is it actually setting the minimum standards that Sir David was talking about, or you're still a little bit fearsome that that might be too much in terms of the regulation and compliance?
Yeah, I would say that we miss UK in European Union because not only because we will destroy English completely likely, but also out of the reasons because it's different way of thinking. It's something that European Union requires, and it's a challenge that of course would be very welcome. But regardless of that fact, we should work in this field together because I think that we in general share common values. So when we're talking about different systems, we came to understanding that words have changed, or we have waken up in this decade to the fact that we have different values, that not necessarily everybody shares the same values, and I think we should understand that. But on the other hand, yes, those who are sharing the same values are typically working together. It doesn't mean that they're working against anybody else, but it's more working together. So this, I think, is important. And I believe that we need this cooperation also across this small sea in between UK and this small divide between UK and European Union. And of course, it's a common ground where I see no reason we couldn't and we should and we must work together. From our perspective now, because this was more the question, of course we want practical approach, and again I'm coming back why we like UK. UK is having lots of this practical approach in several things used to have in European Union, and this I think is very important. It's important for us because, especially in this field, if there is no practical approach, if there is only administration, if there is micromanagement, if there is not setting goals and then leaving the implementation of the other fields, then you get into issues. And European Union, out of different reasons, one of reasons is also because we are living good and life in European Union is good. We somehow became like we are, and we need to change. So I'm very welcoming also this approach, and I hope this will work also on European Union level, because at the end of the day it's not something that we should do, it's something we must do. And practical approach, understanding knowledge, understanding the whole history we have together, at the end of the day, nothing is new. It's only changing, technologies are changing, but everything else at the principle is staying more or less the same. So we have to understand this, and we have to understand the technology, and then we come to the right answers. This is our view.
We need Britain back, and maybe Canada can join in as well. But General, following up with you, we started talking both Azar and Sir David. They mentioned this importance of actually making sure that consequences are very clear. What are your thoughts on signaling consequences in cyberspace? Do you have any specific examples what can work in practice, where it might have worked before, or some suggestions how we can do it better?
Well, first of all, I appreciate the Microsoft role to prevent the possible more damage before the war started. And this is the most important contribution for the private sector can do. So just go back to the demarcation of the labor. Private sector like Microsoft can play significant role. But still, we do have the very broad sense of the cyber domain. There is no demarcation line, borders between the military attack, intelligence gathering, and crime in the cyber domain. Until some consequences felt, we don't know what kind of the activities is ongoing in the cyber domain. So before these damage materialized, we have to prevent. Deterrence is easy to say, but difficult. So prevention is very important. And as I mentioned, threat hunting is one way to prevent the damage. And also multilateral cooperation like American hunt-forward operations. This is the country-to-countries threat hunting activities. So United States dispatch special teams for Ukraine to identify the planted malware or something like that, and then make it clean. So this is a realistic ways to conduct the active cyber defense. And Japan, unfortunately, doesn't have this kind of capability yet. So as I said, we'd like to train the skillful people with the help of the private sector, like Microsoft. Could you please repeat your question again?
No, you're doing great. I was asking about signaling consequences in the cyberspace. What Sir David was saying, how do we actually tell the bad guys, be it Russia or China, that they shouldn't be doing what they're doing in a language that they understand?
We do have the very different concept of deterrence in cyberspace. You know, deterrence, nuclear deterrence is very easy to explain. Just like David mentions, unacceptable consequences can prevent the use of the nuclear weapon. But in cyber domains, it's very difficult to send the signals what kind of damage, if they do actual attack, they're supposed to receive. You know, take down of the server, or but if this is the national act of cyber attack, it's very difficult. You know, offense side has an advantage in this domain. So maybe we can show what we know about the adversary's capability, what kind of the wills, what kind of technology they employed, and future they will not be successfully do the similar attack. So the deleting all the possible attack by showing our capability may be effective. To do so, again, we have to share the data technologies, not only among the Europe, but also including Japan and Asia partners as well.
Yeah, that's a great parallel with nuclear deterrence and how in some ways it's very unsimilar. Like nuclear deterrence is all about clarity. You know the other capabilities. In cyber, I'm not sure we actually know that well what the capabilities are there, also on the defensive side across the board, but also like what constitutes a proportionate response and what are the predictable consequences. So Sir David, I'm going to make it hard for you. I'll throw back to you your own proposition that we need more clarity. How exactly would you find the threshold for it, clarity? Because if we're sometimes a bit too explicit and disclose too much, that might also be to counter-advantage.
I think the General's advice takes us part of the way, which is being open about our knowledge of what they might be planning. But my qualification on that would be that almost inherently there will be some things we don't want to communicate because that would allow our adversaries to find out how we knew. And so we'd have to be very careful about the way in which those communications were made. And secondly, of course, we did just that openness about Russia's plans for the all-out invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. And British and American intelligence really did spell that out openly, and yet that did not deter Putin from going ahead. So I think we need to go further. So, I mean, this is where I think there have to be conversations at the highest level between governments and methodical planning process, because I think we need to look both for development of an offensive cyber capability amongst the democracies, and not just in the United States and Israel, which is where it is now. But I mean, the UK is developing that. I think France is certainly, France, even if they're not saying so, France is developing it. But actually, this should be part of NATO plan. I would argue, in terms of the UK-EU relationship, we should make sure that there is an important cyber element in the planned UK EU defence and security partnership. It is mentioned in the document at the time of the announcement last year, but we need to make a reality of that pledge. So offensive cyber is one thing, but also I think we need to be open about the asymmetric response. And it's a question then of what you communicate when you are aware of particular threats, and through your diplomatic and military to military and intelligence to intelligence channels, which do exist with both Russia and China. Iran and North Korea are more difficult, but you go probably via Russia and China to get to Tehran and Pyongyang. So you say, for example, well, if you do this such that you damage a critical part of our systems infrastructure and put life at risk, you will immediately be cut out of international payment systems. So that will be something that we haven't done over Ukraine, but which would have a potentially devastating impact on the economies of the countries concerned. We know that we think that Joe Biden's government communicated to the Russians that if they were to use a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine, that there would be an American-led NATO attack on all Russian conventional assets inside Ukraine and in the Black Sea. So one wouldn't want to make this public, but I think that governments need to be sitting down in the NATO context particularly, but then in the shared sort of intelligence cooperative network context too, and actually saying, what is it that we have that we can deploy as effective deterrents to hostile action here? And also, how could we retaliate if that deterrence failed?
Azar, I'm really tempted. I know I might be getting you into dangerous waters, but I really want to ask the question.
That's what we're here
for,
right?
When we're talking about, of course, cyber deterrence, cyber retaliation and escalation, at least the debate that comes up often, even in the United States, is one of the reasons why the government would be very cautious in doing cyber offensive operations, even if you know that you're attacked, because the fear is that if, like, Chinese or Russians strike back, our systems are not that prepared to withhold the attacks. So you would try to moderate a little bit the escalation. How confident you are in our defensive capabilities, given how much you know about the offensive capabilities of the other side?
Well, what I do know, I can't tell you. But no, but in all seriousness, I think, let's be very fair. I think clearly that which is public regarding all the bad things that have happened shows that no matter how good our defenses may be, they need to be better. I think that is very clear. I don't know that that's necessarily the reason that there isn't enough kind of offensive asymmetric response. I don't know that it's necessarily because we don't have the right defenses, although it may be. I'm not in the room where these decisions are being made ultimately. But it is true that I think we do need to get better, I think, across all the modern democracies in how we both build our infrastructure out and how resilient it is. And again, also that will take again, the responsibility is not just on industry there, it's also on the nation states to ensure that there is a requirement for security by design and that there is more investment in the skilling of people. Because again, it's not just infrastructure that needs to get better, it's also we individually as humans operating these systems, we are ourselves the vulnerabilities as well. And I think that's another big part of what is going wrong often, is that we may have really great, amazingly hardened interfaces and systems with very, very vulnerable people operating them. And so I think there's a lot to be done there. And I think that there's always improvement to be made. I think what we focus on at Microsoft is we're never going to get to an end state of perfect security where everything is there. And I think you mentioned this earlier as well. What we're striving towards is to get ever closer to a better system, and again, making it such that the economic and broader geopolitical calculus being made by these attackers is not a good one, right? We want to make it expensive, difficult, and we want to ensure that the nation states and governments and civil society partners we work with also make the consequences dire enough that the decision is never made to attempt an infiltration. And with that comes, again, the systems need to become better, but also the skilling of humans needs to be better. We've done some of that work. Some of my colleagues sitting here in the room are often working both with civil society, academics, governments, and even folks just in the general population on skilling up their cyber skills, because I think that is very key and important. But I want to make sure that we're all thinking very clearly here, which is, again, you need ultimately the best possible world is one in which the attack never even is attempted. And the only way to get there is to truly change that calculus. And that will require so many different things to get to a good place. And even in that perfect utopian world, there will still be some attacks. There's always going to be some nation state that says it's worth attempting it. And so there won't be a perfect system to prevent it. But that is where we need to move towards. I hope that answers the question, but I think I don't know that it is are we good enough or not at defense? It's more of how do we continue to strive and improve? And you even mentioned we have quantum coming, we have all these other technologies. So there is no static state of good. There is just a static state of needing to get better. Better late than never. So I think that's where we need to head to, and I think there are many spaces in which we need to accomplish that, and that's where that partnership is going to be needed. And I love what you said earlier regarding the kind of borderless nature of cybercrime and of cyber defense. It will need to be something that happens really throughout these allied, democratic nations and the industries that are in those nations.
Right, that's where actually the standard principle of deterrence holds. We need to have capabilities, both defensive and offensive, and the will to use them. We're going to be starting to take questions from the audience right now. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and you're going to get a microphone. And while you're thinking, we can carry on. Sir David, did you want to jump in on the issue?
I just wanted to develop very briefly that last point. I think on 3 points. One, absolutely endorse the point about the pipeline of skilled people. I mean, that's something that governments will neglect at their peril, that we will need a constant supply of people. And actually, particularly if there's any educators in the room, if we can get more girls trained in cyber skills, because there's a big gender imbalance at the moment there. We need to fill that gap. Secondly, this has got to be mainstreamed, both in government and in the private sector. We can't have the luxury of people thinking, oh, it's a cyber problem. That's for the IT department to sort out. This has got to be something that is taken seriously by every board at every level and every sized organisation that there is. Thirdly, just briefly on offensive cyber capability. I think this makes the point for me as why the institutions of the European Union will not be the right way in which to deal with threats from hostile states, or what MI6 used to describe to me as a criminal enterprise minister with a close relationship to Russia or North Korea. Because the decision about what you communicate, both for deterrent and about what you perhaps do has to be taken quickly. It says we have somebody has clear authority to take a decision, and it's got to be done secretly. So let's say you had an offensive capability in the West that you felt could successfully disrupt North Korea's ballistic missile program. Now, as a political judgment, can you do that without actually triggering an attack by North Korea on the South? But let's say you resolve that. My personal view would be, let's say, well, I think it's a strong case for doing it. But the idea you take that to the Foreign Affairs Council and try to get a unanimous agreement in an afternoon amongst foreign ministers is for the birds. Just even to think about that, it's crazy. So you're negotiating with the governments of one or two of the more difficult countries about what they want in return if they're going to accede to this. You've got several intelligence agencies who are listening in to any discussion that's taking place in the Justus Lipsius building. I've been there. I remember Cathy Ashton, when she was High Rep, suddenly saying, look, it's very disappointing. I'm just reading now online news agency reports about what we agreed half an hour ago here, because somebody had been listening in or had human intelligence from somebody who had been in the room who reported out what was meant to be a confidential foreign policy discussion.
Can I jump in?
Are you listening in?
Yeah. If you develop some technologies to, attack North Korean ballistic missile before launch, please provide it to Japan. But
stress this was in case there's any North Koreans listening somewhere. This is a hypothesis on my part. I have no evidence about it.
But as I mentioned before, there is no clear demarcation line between the military, law enforcement, and then crimes. But this is not only these broad sense, but also in military operations, cyber and electromagnetic warfare becomes very, very important, and it's going to play a major role. If you look at the 12 days war Israeli conducted against Iran, Iran couldn't do anything. They destroyed everything before Iran detected the operation. Why? Because Israel achieved the electromagnetic dominance. And what they do is to combine a cyber operation and electromagnetic operation together. A cyber attack is done through the internet. But now this technology can hack the radio wave. Radar, you mentioned about the GPS, and those radio waves can be hacked. And if you jam it, you know it because, every signal is disturbed. But if you are hacked, you don't know it. And the GPS can lead to the different direction, different height, and crash the plane. This can be done. This technology already exists. So if we look at the future cyber domain, we have to think about electromagnetic field as well. So I just want to propose the NATO, Japan, United States. Japan and United States are allied. NATO is allied to United States, established to conduct research regarding this kind of new future military operation in cyber electromagnetic domain.
I like that. We already have some concrete ideas on the table. I see two hands, but before that, I was also instructed to ask whether there are young Bled Strategic Forum leaders in the room, because you have the right of passage. And if not, then we'll go with the questions. The first front row and the second one.
Thank you very much for the panel. I'm wondering what you would see as a distinction in strategy when dealing with non-state actors, such as organized crime. Thank you.
Let's take two questions at a time, and then we'll go back to the panel. So there's the second question.
Thanks. I'm Mia from the UK government. I'm really interested in how you could collaborate together so that the private sector doesn't steal all of the people trained up in the public sector in cyber resilience. I've done quite a lot of work in the Western Balkans, and every time we have built the capacity in one place, Microsoft comes and poaches them all.
Boštjan, Azar, can you please stop stealing people? But on that note, can we start with that question to both of you? And also maybe there's also the other way around, when private sector can provide capacity for the government, including trained people.
Yeah, first of all, I'd say we're not stealing them. We're just training them up so that we can give them back at a later stage, which is actually... No. And we have seen that door go both ways in many cases, but it's a great question, and I don't want to dodge it with jokes. I think it's one where, let's take the employment piece out of it, but from a more of a skilling perspective, and also I think in these partnerships, and it's something we do strive to do at Microsoft, but we can do better, and I think we as a broader industry, both in tech, but even beyond, I know in telco, et cetera, can probably do better, is, we probably think of these partnerships as more outcome-driven, with like what is the outcome we're delivering from reducing the level of cybercrime or increasing the capacity from a purely technological perspective. But it is a good lens to think about is, are we also during these partnerships paying enough attention to skilling of our partners and having the knowledge exchange not just lead to a good technological outcome, but also lead to an increase in capacity of the humans involved in the partnership. And so I think it's a great piece. I think we do some of this, but I'll take that feedback back to say, how can we do even better in all the work we do with governments, which is extensive, that we're also skilling up people during that work and in those processes and work streams, such that even if some folks do choose to join us or go back to the government, that we've really built a broader systemic approach to this that I think supersedes that from an issue perspective, meaning that you do have what you need from a capability angle. So great feedback, and I think something we can get better at. And I'd love to maybe after this get a chance to chat with you about how we can think about that in the UK specifically.
As long as they don't switch to the dark side, it's all for the benefit
no,
of
it's
everybody.
all the side of lights, exactly. We're all I think here doing the right thing, which is important. And again, I think taking the great brilliant minds from the UK government to then not only build up, I think, Microsoft capacity, but also other governments is always a win-win. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't also get better at skilling up our partners.
Boštjan, and maybe the same question to you. I'll make it even more dire because some countries are worse off than others in terms of demography, in terms of simply people available, especially with skills, how you're approaching this issue, and also the issue of training.
Maybe this internal, how we separate. We have governance in cybersecurity. We have governance and we have implementation. And now stealing people from government bodies or institutions, we don't. But what is true, we are stealing them from faculties. Of course, young people are more prone to get jobs in private sector out of different reasons, especially in implementation field, maybe not so much in the governance field. And yes, we believe that we will also giving them back. So we're not stealing, but likely we will give them back also in future, as these things will progress, as we do for our competition. So we are establishing good people, and then they sometimes leave, of course. On the other hand, how we see this in future is especially, yes, we have to democratize it and especially make fitting the abilities. So implementation is not for everybody. You need technical skill for implementations. Governance is something that requires some process skills, but it's different in nature. So I think that we should have these distinctions and use them in order to get right people in the right positions, not to pushing wrong people in wrong positions. And in general, we also need the faculties and all the institutions related to education, not only faculties, but also in secondary schools, improving our potential in this regards, which I have no idea how doing it. It's a very hard question how you do that, because it's something that it changes every week, not every year. Especially artificial intelligence is having such a progress that you cannot have teachers for artificial intelligence. Maybe you have teachers for implementing the latest methods of using artificial intelligence, but that is something that as a job is not existing yet, but would be required actually, not only in educational institutions, but also in companies. So there are many different questions which we have to approach, and we have to lean what we did in the past now. As said, this is a new tool, but at the end of the day, it's just a new tool, a new toolbox, but the principles are the same. also international relations, everything is more or less the same. The toolbox of difference. We have to understand them, implement them.
Perfect. General Sir David, I'll leave you the question on differentiating between state and non-state actors.
This is my personal observation, but state actor, non-state actor, doesn't matter. The purpose is important. You know, if a non-state actor wants to steal the intellectual property or money, then this is the law enforcement responsibility. If the non-state actor tries to damage critical infrastructure like electric power, communications, and transportation, all these things, this probably is related to the military operations or something like that. Of course, state actor can utilize the much more resources to prepare, conduct these operations. So we have to prepare for this state actor attack. But the purpose, motivation is important. Again, private sector is subject to the steal of the intellectual property and also the disturbing the critical infrastructure operations. So both we can think both motivations in terms of the private sector. That's why it is important for the inter-community to provide what kind of actor is behind the scene and what kind of motivation they have to achieve by conducting this cyber attack.
And Sir David?
I mean, if the criminal group is a proxy for a hostile state, it's the cyber equivalent of the Wagner group, let's say, then I think that falls into the category that we've been talking about in terms of how we address hostile states. But most crime in the United Kingdom is now committed online. And these are offences that are known to law: theft, fraud, criminal damage. Obviously, you have to keep the definitions of those offences up to date. I would rather make sure we were sufficiently broad in our definitions of those understood offences than to write separate cyber crimes onto the statute book. I think that there's a lot that can and should be done in terms of improving defences, that just as people have better burglar alarms, just as cars have central locking systems now and other systems to deter car theft, to make it more difficult, we should be doing the same on the cyber front as much as possible. And that again takes you back to effective work with the private sector, but also saying to people, look, there is a responsibility. You can do things that will actually lessen your insurance premium because you can help yourself. But when it comes to detecting and convicting people who have carried out cybercrime, I think that we need to give a good shake-up to our police and investigatory services. I think in Britain, frankly, successive governments have just let this one slip for far too long, and most complaints are just recorded, but no action is ever taken. So the police need to have the skills and to investigate and be told that this is important in terms of public confidence in the law. And then I think we need to look at our trial processes. Have we got the law and procedures on evidence and what needs to be shown to a court that does protect the rights of defendants, but also does make it easy for a judge or a jury to understand what is going on, and if the evidence is compelling, to come to a conviction there. So I think there are changes that we can make.
We still have 5 minutes, so we'll bring in one more question.
May I add one more aspect?
Very, very briefly.
Yeah, yes. Influence the people's thinking is important aspect of the cyber operation. You know, a non-state actor can act on behalf of the specific state, just like Russia influenced the election in the United States. So they just disturb the people's thinking and distort the thinking, and there is no specific goals to achieve. Just distorting is the purpose. So we have to be prepared for this kind of the cyber influence by raising the people's awareness and literacy.
Perfect. Actually, we have 2 questions, so it's going to be rapid fire, quick questions, very quick answers. The gentleman here and then the lady in the front row.
Thank you. Klaus Dodds from London. So quick question about awkwardness and partnerships. 2 weeks ago, the Danes were told to calm down by the Trump administration regarding disinformation vis-à-vis the island of Greenland. So I wondered whether you could say something about how that might work in the future. And the other one for me is the very paradoxical role of Israel. On the one hand, Israel has demonstrated extraordinary capabilities against non-state and state adversaries. On the other hand, I might be concerned if I was a member of a state that had recently recognized Palestine, and that whether I'm then going to be subject to those same extraordinary cyber capabilities. So I wonder whether we have to talk about Israel as an awkward partner and ally in the future.
And the second question here.
Okay, so thank you for everything so far, and I would like to follow the discussions from the previous panel that also includes critical thinking. I want to focus on a crucial element overlooked in cybersecurity, the role of trust in AI. So given the critical thinking skills are lacking, are diminishing, partly due to resilience on AI. And while you see basic measures like two-factor authentications becoming a standard now, my question is, what can your organization go forward to proactively educate, empower, protect young people from these threats and target their trust and critical thinking? Or what are you already doing, or what you would like to emphasize more?
Thank you so much. So it's going to be the final round, so please choose one question you want to address and do it briefly. We have a question about awkward partners and how we go about them, and a question about increasing trust and educating people. Go ahead. Yeah.
Please. The rest I'm leaving to the diplomats. But in this, basics are very important. Still, on cybersecurity threats, we see lots of basic stuff, and especially two-factor authentication is something that must become a norm all over. And not only that, new methods which will provide even more security in this regards. But why is this so important? Especially because autonomous systems are exploiting common, small things where they can enter. And if this is usually very simple, and you can do it autonomously. So for sure, if you have such a vulnerability, for sure you will at certain stage be attacked. That's a certainty. And that's why this basics are extremely important. How we are doing it, of course, with multi-factor authentication and also educating people on cybersecurity level, especially strange emails, stuff like this. How we are doing it with internal educational procedure, which consists of short electronic lectures and tests at the end. And it's something mandatory that each employee have to go through, and this basic sort of things is actually covered with that. And we are also doing tests when we are doing phishing ourselves and similar attacks ourselves to see how many of those who successfully passed the lesson still got caught. And it sometimes still happens, but it's improving. It definitely is improving. So I would say large emphasis on basic, so that this basic are no more threat. Because if this is threat, then it's a certainty something will go wrong. That is experience for sure.
Perfect. General?
Yes, trust is very important. And, if you don't believe what is reported in TV or a newspaper, you have no idea what's going on, right? So everything's based upon the trust. But nowadays, there are too many fake news, and how do we know this one is true, the other one is false? So we have to have some kind of technology to identify the authenticity of the things, like movies or paintings, photographs. Everything can be manipulated by bad actors. So in Japan, we have some discussion regarding the originator profile. This is kind of a signature to put on the articles, photos, and everything, so that we know this one is the originally created by this particular person or entity. So if we apply these technologies to internet, maybe using the AI again, then we can have a basis for trust in
Perfect. Azar?
Okay, I'll try to go with a not so awkward answer to a slightly awkward question about awkward partnerships. I think at a high level, and this builds a bit on what you'd mentioned regarding trust, but I think if first and foremost, if we can build more multilateral opportunities for partnership, even amongst various nation states that may not have the most perfect relationships, but do at least share in common, respect for rule of law, democratic institutions, and in many cases very similar antagonists in their geopolitical spaces that are attacking all of them. I think there is always an opportunity for some level of cooperation. That may not mean it will be to the fullest extent like something you may see in Five Eyes, but there is opportunity there. And I think through those opportunities, hopefully, we'll build more trust and opportunity to drive into better spaces from a geopolitical perspective, such that it becomes less awkward. So I think it's a great question. I'm not in the position of making those decisions at the nation-state level, but I still think it is very important that even when it is a bit awkward, there is still some level of cooperation amongst, I think generally allied and directionally aligned democratic institutions and nations, given the fact that they tend to have the same adversaries in the cyberspace.
Sir David?
The luxury of being an ex-minister is that you are not constrained by the needs of diplomacy any longer. I think that Israel's going to be an awkward partner, very awkward partner, for as long as Netanyahu is prime minister and as long as you've got racists like Ben Gvir and Smotrich propping up the government. I take heart from the fact that they don't represent the whole of Israel. So I just think it's going to be a very difficult, bumpy time, but it's for the Israeli people to determine who their government is. With the United States, my personal view is that while Donald Trump is a particularly vivid and idiosyncratic demonstration of a trend, I think there is a longer-term trend. In the United States, getting very impatient, rightly, with Europeans freeloading on US taxpayers for their security and defense, and the United States turning increasingly to the Pacific and looking at China as its challenger and rival. You could see that when Bob Gates was there under George W. Bush. You saw it in President Obama's time. You saw it in President Biden's time. And I think that's going to continue. So I think in that sense, there will be a more difficult relationship to handle going forward than the sort of comfort zone we've been in for much of the past 80 years. But I think with the particular threats over Greenland are utterly wrong, and I think that European countries need to be showing very clear solidarity with Denmark on this. I think it is absolutely outrageous. Denmark, in pro rata to its population, suffered as many casualties in Afghanistan as the United States of America. They had troops at the forefront of the NATO mission there. They've always seen themselves as one of the closest NATO allies to the United States. And I hope that this is a passing phase, but I worry about not just about the sporadic continuing language about Greenland and Denmark. But I worry when the Vice President of the United States seeks out an overtly racist and ultranationalist party in Germany for a meeting. And by some of the things that are said in MAGA world about these matters and meddling in European countries' domestic, political and criminal justice matters online. Okay, online people are not the same as governments, and beneath the surface, diplomatic, military, intelligence, cultural, economic and business relationships are still very deep and very powerful, and we're going to need to use all of those. But I do worry about this, and one of the antidotes is actually going to be to make sure that every child in every school and every university student has critical thinking built into the curriculum, not just as a separate subject, but right across the whole curriculum, whatever subjects they like best and specialize in.
Thank you so much, everybody. I think our panel was not awkward at all. If anything, it was vivid and energetic and gives me a lot of hope about our ability to build resilience, coordinate internationally, and also make consequences credible. Thank you for everybody for being here. You definitely like the panel because you're here instead of having lunch. We're already over time, but as they say, better late than never. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here and for staying with us.